Hello and welcome back to another research recap. My name is Lisa. I'm your host. I'm the head coach and owner of Nutrition Coaching and Life. We help people lose fat, gain muscle, recomp their bodies, live healthier, happier lives by improving their relationship with food. So welcome to this channel. On Wednesdays, I like to jump on here to talk about somewhat recent research that pertains to nutrition and fitness and just kind of dig into it, what that means for practical applications for ourselves, but also for our clients, or just in general, if you're interested in research. Hopefully you enjoy this too. And if you do me a favor, subscribe to our channel, hit the notifications button. Also check out some of our other content on Instagram, on the website where we have blogs up, and of course also our podcast. But yeah, today's topic is actually quite near and dear to me because I have been really focusing on hypertrophy over the last couple of years. And the title of today's paper is actually Differential Effects of Attentional Focus Strategies During Long-Term Resistance Training. This was a study done by Schoenfeld et al. In 2018. What that actually means is, does it make a difference if we focus on mind-muscle connection, or if we just focus on I need to get the weight up and like kind of the movement that we're doing when it comes to hypertrophy and also when it comes to strength? So we're going to look at both of those things. So the objectives of this study were to investigate the impact of attentional focus on muscle hypertrophy and strength gains during resistance training. So we have these two different outcome measures, and then to compare the effects of internal focus, so mind-muscle connection, the muscle being worked, and external focus, focusing on the outcome of the lift, on muscular adaptations over the course of an 8-week resistance training program. And the third objective was to enhance recommendations for resistance training practices based on findings related to attentional focus, which makes sense. We always love when things are practical, applicable, and not just out there in the science world. So let's talk about what the study actually entailed. We had 30 participants. They were all male, somewhere around about 21, 22 years, without existing musculoskeletal disorders, and they were randomly assigned to either an internal focus group, so mind-muscle connection, or an external focus group, get the weight up. We will talk more about the specifics of these participants in a second, but just a broad training regime overview was that the participants engaged in a supervised resistance training program over 10 weeks, with 8 weeks dedicated to training and 2 weeks for testing. The exercises that they included were the standing barbell curl and a machine leg extension. And we will talk specifically about why they chose these exercises as opposed to compounds or so in a minute. But they also took various outcome measures. So for example, muscle thickness, that was assessed pre and post study using ultrasound. They also took an in-body scan, but they also kind of they didn't look into nutrition, but they tried to make sure that nothing was changed when it comes to nutrition. Again, more on that in a second. And yes, then let's get into the essential points of what that study was about. So when we're talking about the attentional focus, that is defined as the cognitive direction during physical tasks, with an external focus commonly linked to better performance in various studies as it pertains to strength. And kind of more like bro science-wise, the internal focus is more linked to hypertrophy. The hypothesis, therefore, was that the internal focus was to result in a greater muscle development compared to external focus. When it comes to the demographic of the participants, they collected all the data and really made sure that it was a homogeneous group for valid comparison. So not people with resistance training experience in the one group and those with none in the other group or so. That would not have been great for comparison. And what is also a really big highlight or pro to the study is that it was a supervised training. We all know how difficult it can be, or how we just often interpret things ourselves into a training program when we're reading it, or even when we're exercising. We're like, I'm pushing myself close to failure, but we might not actually be pushing ourselves close to failure, or it might be something about the range of motion or so. So anyway, having this supervised is actually a really, really big pro. When it comes to the nutritional support, so to speak, they basically wanted the participants to track their food intake throughout the entire time, but they also tracked specifically like before and after in the first week and in the last week where the testing took place, just to ensure that they actually continued with doing somewhat the same things, which was their instruction. The only thing that was changed or added was a 25-gram protein shake post training to assist with muscle recovery and development. So as I was reading that, a few things came up for me. Firstly, of course, again, like what was the resistance training experience of the participants? Were they advanced lifters? Were they completely new? They didn't specify if they were completely new, but they did say that all subjects had not performed any regimented resistance training for at least 1 year prior to the study, which allowed for a more baseline assessment of how different attention strategies impact muscle adaptations during training. Makes complete sense to me. If we have more experienced lifters, it's going to be different. And also as more experienced lifters, we're going to expect less growth and less strength increase than if someone is completely new. And I also really wanted to hear about the specifics of the study protocol. So the participants engaged in 3 training sessions per week on non-consecutive days, ensuring adequate recovery between sessions. And in terms of the structure, so I guess I should also say, in terms of the 2 exercises, they chose them because, let's just say if we're doing a squat, you might be so focused on, hey, I'm not supposed to shift my weight over my heels or over my toes. I'm not supposed to have my knees caved in. My back might start rounding. Am I going low enough? So you have all these things going through your head. So you can't really just think of like, oh, mind-muscle connection, mind-muscle connection, mind-muscle connection. You're just too focused on form things as opposed to with isolation exercises. And particularly also things like the leg extension where you're like secured into place. Excuse me. I have to say, I was doing a high rocks class today. That was my very first one. I thought it was a brilliant idea to jump right into a high rocks workout from not having done any cardio in like two years. Excuse me, I'm gonna drink something. And it was a lot of fun. I actually really enjoyed it, but it did show me that like I feel like I have something called like Fran cough. To any of you out there who have done CrossFit before, you will know what that is. But hopefully this will make it a little bit better. Apologies for that. So the exercises were chosen again as they allowed easier implementation of attentional focus strategies during the performance of single joint movements than compared to compound movements. The workout structure was that for each exercise, they were instructed to do 4 sets with 8 to 12 repetitions per set. The participants were encouraged to perform as many repetitions as possible until reaching momentary concentric muscular failure. So concentric is like when we're curling the bar up or when we're extending the leg on those 2 exercises. And therefore, momentary concentric muscular failure is defined as the inability to perform another concentric repetition while maintaining proper form. The subjects were provided with 2 minutes of rest between the sets to ensure recovery. And I think that's a really good range for both the reps as well as the rest time, because 2 minutes of rest and, somewhere between 8 to 12 reps is kind of both in the strength increase and the hypertrophy range. If we can define something as such, often if we have shorter rest, that's supposed to be said less optimal for strength increases. If we have longer rest, it's not necessarily more beneficial for hypertrophy. If we have a higher rep count, like 20 reps or so, it's meant to be a little bit better for hypertrophy. Or if we have, 4 reps or so, might be more for strength. So this is kind of meeting somewhere in the middle, which I really like. And when it comes to the loading and the progression, the weights were adjusted for each exercise based on individual performance, aiming to progressively increase the load each week while staying within the target repetition range of 8 to 12 reps. Prior to starting the training, participants underwent a 10 repetition maximum test to establish their baseline strength and determine appropriate loading for subsequent exercises. Also makes complete sense. Then in terms of the supervision and cues, so the trainings were conducted under the supervision of certified trainers, which again, I believe is a really big pro to the study, who provided specific cues aligned with attentional focus strategies. So for the internal focus group, they instructed them, or the cues were squeeze the muscle. So literally like think of your biceps as you're curling this up, or if you're extending the leg, think of your quadriceps, think of your quadriceps. And then for the external focus group, the cue was literally just get the weight up. So like just focusing on the movement itself, and that was it. So when we're talking about the outcomes, one second. I should add that the participants were instructed to avoid any additional resistance type or high intensity anaerobic training throughout the study to ensure that all adaptations were purely due to the assigned resistance training protocol. And like I mentioned, in terms of nutrition, they just wanted to make sure that nothing was really changed, so that could not have been an influential factor. So they instructed them to keep the same regimen, to track their food on MyFitnessPal, and to include 25 grams of protein post-session to optimize recovery and muscle growth. So the outcome measures of the study was, well, when we're talking about hypertrophy, there were 3 sites where muscle thickness was measured via ultrasound. It was the elbow flexors, so yeah, things like biceps, and when it comes to the leg, the mid thigh and the lateral thigh. So the mid thigh is a composite of the rectus femoris and the vastus intermedius, and the lateral thigh is a composite of the vastus lateralis and the vastus intermedius. In an effort to ensure that the swelling in the muscles from training did not obscure the results, the ultrasound images were obtained 48 to 72 hours before commencement of the study, as well as after the final training session. So now, when it comes to the actual outcomes, and this is a quote, of the 3 muscles that were measured, only elbow flexor hypertrophy differed statistically between groups, with a large effect size favoring the internal focus condition. Small and trivial effect sizes favoring external and internal focus were observed for the rectus femoris and the vastus lateralis respectively. So yes. And then when we're talking about, so I guess to summarize, they only really saw a difference in terms of the internal focus versus external focus in hypertrophy for the biceps, none for the other muscles. And when it comes to strength, so strength was measured by way of, what was that called? I had it written down here somewhere. Well, I'm going to get to it in a second, but there were, in essence, no statistical differences between groups for any of the strength measures. There was a small effect size favoring the external focus condition for the isometric knee extension strength, while a moderate effect size favoring internal focus was observed for the isometric elbow flexion strength. However, that with respect to the peak isometric elbow flexion strength, the magnitude was so small, so it's essentially not statistically significant. The potential findings are in contrast, so again, like the potential findings in the sense of this small, tiny difference. These potential findings are in contrast to acute studies, wherein an external focus of attention is often found to result in greater strength performance than an internal focus of attention, as opposed to isometric elbow flexion strength. Peak isometric knee extension strength favored external versus internal, but again, the observed effect size was small and did not reach statistical significance. So I guess we can summarize it that the only thing that really did reach a statistical significance when it comes to strength or hypertrophy was in the elbow flexion, where the internal focus group seemed to have greater adaptation. So I think that is really the main takeaway. Otherwise, no statistical differences were found between the groups for any of the body composition measures, which they also took with the in-body. So let me move on. The key findings. This is another quote. The key findings partially support the common bodybuilding claim that a mind-muscle connection enhances muscle growth. Although we did not attempt to determine mechanistic reasons for discrepant findings between the upper and lower limbs, it can be speculated that subjects found it easier to focus on the elbow flexor muscles compared to the thighs, a sentiment that was anecdotally expressed by several participants in the internal group. Postulations regarding the mechanisms of this phenomenon can be deducted from motor control and neuroplasticity perspectives. First, neuromuscular re-education, at least following tendon transfer, appears to be more prevalent in upper compared to lower extremities, suggesting that the nervous system is better able to alter muscle recruitment patterns of the upper extremity. I have to throw in a little bit of a personal anecdote here, or just simply saying that I 100% agree with this. I mean, if you ask me, or would have asked me even years ago, flex your biceps, it's one of the first things kids learn how to do. You flex your biceps in order to look strong. But then if someone says to you, activate your glutes, you're like squeezing your bum a little bit or pushing your hip around, but it's like, what part of the glute are you really activating? I mean, yes, the quadriceps is probably easier to flex or to engage, to think of, than specific areas of the glutes, but not as easy as like triceps or biceps or I have had to learn how to activate my glutes very much so. And that brings me to the point also of that I personally think mind-muscle connection and focusing on mind-muscle connection, or having an internal focus while training, is wildly underrated. I believe that we have gone way too much into the space of like just focusing on weights, just focusing on progressive overload, and kind of veered too much or too far away from focusing on mind-muscle connection. And when I say we, I mean like the general population. I know that in the bodybuilding space, it's still very, very common and widespread, thankfully, to think of what muscle you're trying to activate. But just in terms of general population, I think we've almost gone too much into the functional space, where we're just like, just move, just jump, just, without even knowing, like, okay, when you're doing a box jump or when you're doing a step up, what are you actually working? Like, maybe the next day you can feel it in your calves, or are you supposed to feel it in your calves? Are you supposed to feel it in your glutes? Where are you supposed to feel it? So having a good personal trainer, or even just going through it yourself in the sense of, hey, when I'm executing this movement, what is actually supposed to be the primary mover? What is supposed to be assistant muscles? What are the antagonists, the ones that work mostly when we're lowering the weight? I think this is information that can be so helpful in the execution, and therefore also in the where are we thinking of, and therefore also with hypertrophy. I don't know what your experience is with this. If you have for a while focused on, I'm going to improve my mind-muscle connection, let me know in the comments, or if you found any benefit to it. Also, for me, it was not just the glutes, but also the lats. That's really one thing I have learned, or had to learn, to activate. And I was doing it wrong probably until a long time. Even when I was trying to focus on it, I was still kind of focusing more on the rhomboids, or like somewhere in the back, like for instance with pullovers, straight arm pullovers or so. I used to always get afterwards tension in my neck, and I just thought it was from working hard. And then I did a personal training session with an IAFBB pro. She's amazing. A shout out to Jennifer Zinat. She was like, Lisa, you're not actually using your lats like at all. No wonder we're not seeing any growth in there. So I can only encourage you also to film yourself to see like what muscles are actually working. Of course, a little bit of soreness is actually a good indication that you are working the right muscles if you're sore in that particular area where you're is supposed to work the muscle, I guess. But yeah, I would love to hear your guys' experience with this. Just in general, I think when it comes to this paper, the findings do indicate that an internal focus, this is the conclusion of the authors, that an internal focus of attention can be superior to an external focus of attention when the goal is to maximize hypertrophy of the elbow flexors. And attentional focus does not seem to affect lower extremity hypertrophy, which may be due to the difficulty for untrained individuals to establish a mind-muscle connection in the thigh musculature during resistive exercise. And there was no difference in terms of external versus internal focus for strength outcomes. So that's kind of the takeaway. I hope you enjoyed this paper. I can only really recommend reading it. Another contributing author was Brett Contreras, who is huge when it comes to all things glute gains, which is, of course, as some of you might know, one of my areas of focus, or just has been my focus for the last few years. So in any case, thank you so much for listening. Hope you find this interesting. I'm going to drop the exact title again in the show notes, and I want to wish you a wonderful rest of your day.